She stood there, caught between disbelief and a feeling she couldn't name. The honesty in his eyes made it impossible to dismiss what he'd said. He wasn't joking, and he wasn't being reckless. He was simply being real. They said goodnight, and she drove home in silence, her heart echoing every word he'd spoken. The house felt too quiet when she walked in. She sat on the couch, replaying the moment over and over, wondering how a simple message could turn into a truth that had been waiting in the background, quietly growing over the years. The next morning, she found herself thinking about him while making breakfast. She tried to distract herself, did the dishes, cleaned her shelves, even started a new book, but nothing worked. Her thoughts kept returning to the way he'd looked at her, not with the admiration of a boy, but with the steady affection of a man who meant what he said. A few days later, Ethan showed up at her door. He was holding a small plant. "I remembered you used to love ferns," he said shyly. "Thought you might like this one?" Emma smiled, trying not to show how touched she was. "That's sweet, Ethan. Thank you." He shrugged. "Just something small. Mom used to say you had the best green thumb." They ended up sitting in her kitchen, drinking coffee and talking again. Hours passed without either of them noticing. There was laughter, comfortable silence, and those fleeting moments when their eyes met and lingered a little too long. At one point, when she walked him to the door, he hesitated before leaving. "You always made this house feel like home," he said quietly. "Even when I was a kid." She felt her chest tighten. "That's because you were part of it," she replied softly. He smiled, looking at her like he wanted to say more but chose not to. "Maybe I still am," he whispered before turning away. That night, Emma sat by her window again, the rain returning as if it had been waiting for her thoughts. She couldn't stop replaying his words, his expression, the sincerity in his tone. She knew how it looked from the outside, complicated, unexpected. But what she felt wasn't wrong. It was confusing, yes, but it came from something honest. She remembered the years when she used to look out for him, making sure he stayed on track, reminding him of his worth when he doubted himself. Now here he was, standing tall, grounded, looking at her as though she was the one who needed reminding that she still mattered. Her phone buzzed once more that night. It was a message from Ethan. "Thank you for today. It felt good to talk again. You've always made things make sense." She typed a simple reply. "I'm glad you came back, Ethan." As she hit send, she realized it was true. His return had stirred something alive in her heart, something she didn't know she'd been missing. She didn't know where this would go, or even if it should go anywhere. But for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of what might happen next. The rain outside softened, the wind calmed, and in that quiet, she smiled to herself. Maybe the message hadn't slid wrong after all. Maybe it had found its way exactly where it was meant to be. The days that followed felt like a slow change of season. It's quiet but noticeable. Emma began to see Ethan more often. Sometimes it was a casual meet-up for coffee. Other times he'd show up at her porch with takeout and that easy smile that could light up even her grayest evenings. It all started naturally, like two old friends catching up after years apart. But deep down, Emma knew something had shifted. There was warmth, now unspoken, but present, growing quietly in the spaces between words. One Thursday evening, Ethan stopped by after work. His hair was damp from the drizzle, and he carried 2 cups of hot chocolate. "Thought you might need this," he said, setting one on her kitchen counter. His voice carried a mix of confidence and nervousness. It's a tone that made Emma's chest tighten just a little. "Always bringing something," she teased lightly, taking the cup. "You don't have to do that." He shrugged with a grin. "I like excuses to stop by." The comment hung between them. Simple, honest, and enough to make her heart skip. She looked away, pretending to busy herself with the sugar jar. But the air had changed again just like that. They sat in the living room, the rain tapping gently against the windows. The conversation drifted easily, at first his new freelance project, her recent work deadlines, but soon quiet settled in. The kind of silence that wasn't awkward, but meaningful. Ethan looked at her then, his voice softer. "You've always been good at listening, Emma. I didn't realize how much I missed that." She smiled faintly. And you've always been good at talking when it matters. He laughed quietly. I learned that from you. Her eyes met his, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to pause. It was too easy to get lost in that look, too easy to forget that this wasn't supposed to happen. She blinked, forcing herself to break the moment. You should be seeing people your own age, she said, trying to sound light but feeling her heart sink. He leaned forward slightly, not in defiance but with gentle honesty. Maybe, but I haven't met anyone who makes me feel the way you do. She froze. The words were simple, but they carried more weight than he probably realized. She wanted to tell him that it wasn't right, that the world wouldn't understand, that this was crossing some invisible line between affection and something deeper. But she couldn't, because part of her, the part that had been lonely for too long, didn't. Want to push it away? Instead, she stood and walked to the window, watching the soft blur of streetlights in the rain. Ethan, this isn't simple, she said finally, her voice steady but quiet. He didn't argue. He just nodded, his tone gentle. I know, but maybe the best things never are. That night after he left, Emma couldn't sleep. She lay awake, her thoughts a mix of longing and fear. She wasn't someone who chased impossible things. Her whole life had been about keeping balance, choosing what was sensible. But every time she tried to reason her feelings away, she saw his smile, heard his laugh, remembered the way he looked at her not with confusion, but clarity. Days turned into weeks, and their friendship deepened in quiet ways. They took long walks by the lake, cooked together on lazy evenings, and shared memories of the years between them. Ethan told her about his struggles in the city, the loneliness he'd tried to ignore, the relationships that never felt right. Emma listened, feeling the kind of empathy that comes only from understanding someone's silence. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Ethan said softly, I used to come here as a kid because I always felt calm around you. I didn't know why back then. I do now. She looked at him, feeling her chest tighten. And why's that? He smiled gently. Because you see me. The real me. Her heart ached at his words. It was too sincere, too raw. She wanted to protect him from this, protect both of them, but her emotions were no longer under control. She could feel the line between what was right and what was real, blurring more each day. That weekend, Laura called again. Ethan's been spending a lot of time around town, hasn't he? She asked casually. I'm glad he's reconnecting. Emma forced a smile, even though her voice trembled slightly. Yes, he's been visiting. It's nice having him around. After the call, Emma sat in silence, her hands trembling. The reality hit her like cold water. She was falling for her best friend's son, something she'd never imagined, something she couldn't explain to anyone. The thought terrified her, but denying it felt worse. That night, Ethan stopped by again, holding a small book. I found this old poetry collection. Thought you might like it? She smiled weakly. You always remember the little things. He watched her for a moment, then said quietly, Emma, I don't want to make things complicated for you, but I can't pretend I don't feel what I feel. She took a deep breath, her eyes soft but firm. Ethan, this is dangerous. People won't understand. Your mother, he interrupted gently. I'm not worried about anyone else. I just want to be honest with you. That's all. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled softly, casting warm light across the room. She could see the sincerity in his face, the kind that wasn't born of infatuation, but something deeper, steady, genuine affection. Finally, she said quietly, You're kind, Ethan, and your heart is good. But sometimes being good means knowing when to stop. He looked at her, eyes steady. And sometimes it means knowing when not to. Her breath caught. It was such a simple answer, yet it echoed in her chest long after he left that night. In the days that followed, she tried to distance herself, tried to find comfort in old routines. But everything reminded her of him, the books he'd lent her, the coffee mugs he'd used, the quiet laughter that still seemed to linger in the air. She missed his presence more than she wanted to admit. One evening, she found herself sitting alone by the lake where they had walked weeks earlier. The sunset painted the water gold, and she whispered to herself, "Why does the heart never choose what's easy?" Behind her, a familiar voice said, "Maybe because easy things don't stay." She turned, and there he was, standing with that same gentle smile. He walked closer, no rush in his step, no grand gestures, just calm honesty. "I don't expect anything from you," he said softly. "I just needed you to know that I meant what I said." Emma looked at him, torn between reason and the quiet truth her heart had already accepted. "You don't give up easily, do you?" He shook his head. "Not when it feels right." The moments stretched between them, spoken, fragile, real. Emma sat in her cozy living room, the soft hum of rain against the windows, mixing with the low crackle of her fireplace. The evening felt quiet, the kind of quiet that came after years of predictable routines. She had learned to love her peace, the long walks after work, the way her tea steamed on cold mornings, the comfort of knowing her life was steady, even if it wasn't exciting. At 40, she had stopped expecting surprises. Her best friend, Laura, had moved away 2 years ago, leaving their small Washington town for a sunnier life in California. They talked every few weeks, mostly about simple things: Laura's garden, her husband's new job, or memories from when their kids were younger. Emma had been part of that family for decades, like an aunt who never left. Laura's son, Ethan, was one of those memories. She could still picture him as a teenager helping her carry boxes during her house move. Always smiling, shyly, polite to a fault. He used to call her Miss Emma when he was little, a name that always made her laugh. Over the years, he grew into a young man, then moved away to Seattle for work. Their connection had faded into the occasional social media, or birthday message. It was late that night when Emma noticed the small buzz of her phone. She picked it up, expecting a weather alert or maybe one of those limited offer emails. Instead, she saw a message on her screen, one name that caught her off guard. Ethan. She smiled faintly. Wondering why he'd be messaging her at this hour? Maybe he wanted to ask about his mom's birthday gift again. Or maybe just to check in. She tapped the notification. The message read, "I didn't mean to send that here." And below it, a small red heart emoji. Then another line appeared right before she could even blink. "I still think about you sometimes." Her heart stopped for a second. She read it twice, maybe 3 times, just to be sure. The words looked simple, harmless even, but something about them felt heavy. "I still think about you sometimes." What could that mean? She leaned back on her couch, unsure whether to laugh, blush, or just ignore it. Before she could decide, another message came through fast, almost panicked. "Emma, I'm so sorry. That was meant for someone else. I slid wrong." She let out a nervous laugh, pressing a hand over her mouth. A slid wrong. She'd heard that phrase before when someone accidentally sent a message to the wrong person. A text or a post meant for someone else. Still, she couldn't shake the warmth that spread in her chest. It was innocent, she told herself. A mistake. These things happen. But deep down, the message had stirred something. She hadn't been on the receiving end of any sort of flirtation or affection in a long time. Her marriage had ended quietly 5 years ago, leaving behind a soft kind of loneliness she never fully admitted to anyone, not even Laura. She tried to put her phone down and move on, but her eyes kept drifting back to the screen. That one line, "I still think about you sometimes," echoed in her mind. It wasn't even directed at her, but somehow it felt personal. Ethan had always been thoughtful, kind, and mature for his age. She remembered the way he helped her fix her broken fence one summer. How he stayed even after sunset just to make sure the job was done. They'd sat on her porch after drinking lemonade and talking about his plans for college. He was only 18 then, and she was 34. But she had felt a strange protectiveness over him, like he was the son she never had. Now, sitting there with her phone glowing in the dark, she realized he wasn't that boy anymore. He was a grown man, a man who, even by accident, had just sent her something that made her heart flutter in a way it hadn't in years. Her mind wandered for a moment. What if he had meant it? What if he'd been thinking about her? No, that was impossible. She shook her head and smiled to herself. "You're reading too much into it," she whispered. Still, curiosity got the better of her. She opened his profile, scrolling through his recent photos. There he was, standing near a mountain trail, laughing with friends, his hair a little longer than she remembered. His smile was the same, though, that same warm, easy smile that had once made even the dullest afternoons feel brighter. Emma sighed and locked her phone. It was silly, she told herself. It was nothing. But deep inside, the quiet of her house suddenly felt heavier. She thought about calling Laura, maybe joking about the message, but decided against it. It didn't feel like something she should laugh about, not yet. The next morning, she tried to carry on as usual. She made coffee, read the news, and went about her day. But her mind kept drifting back to that moment. She wondered if Ethan was embarrassed, if he'd been worrying all night about it. She hoped he wasn't. He'd always been such a good-hearted person. She didn't want him feeling awkward. 2 days later, another message came. "Hey, just wanted to say sorry again about the message. I felt terrible. Hope you're not weirded out." She smiled softly, typing back, "Don't worry about it. Happens to everyone. No harm done." He replied with a relieved emoji and a short line. "You're kind, as always." It was such a small exchange, yet it left her heart feeling unexpectedly light. For the rest of the day, she found herself humming while she cooked, noticing the way the late sunlight fell across her kitchen table. It was as if something had quietly woken up inside her, the memory of being seen, of being part of someone's thoughts. Later that night, she opened her phone again, rereading the old messages, wondering why such simple words could carry so much weight. Maybe it wasn't about the message at all. Maybe it was about how it reminded her that she was still someone capable of stirring emotion, even if only by accident. She closed her eyes, leaning back in her chair. It had been a long time since her heart had felt anything close to a flutter. It wasn't love, not yet. It was just a feeling, a spark she hadn't expected, as the clock neared midnight. She thought about sending a message, something lighthearted, something to ease whatever awkwardness lingered between them. But she hesitated. She didn't want to make it strange. Instead, she whispered to herself, "Let it be. If it means something, it'll come back around." She turned off her phone and went to bed, unaware that this small mistake, the message that slid wrong, was about to change everything she thought she knew about timing, love, and the quiet ways the heart begins to wake again. That night, she dreamed of rain, of laughter on her porch, and a voice that said, "I still think about you sometimes." When she woke, her heart was still racing, not from fear, but from the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, it hadn't been such a mistake after all. A week after the accidental message, Emma had almost convinced herself to forget about it. She told herself it was harmless, something that didn't deserve another thought. Life went back to normal quiet mornings with coffee, long work hours, and peaceful evenings spent reading by the window. But sometimes when her phone buzzed, her heart would still jump a little. Expecting it to be him, then one Saturday morning, her phone rang. It was Laura. Her cheerful voice filled the kitchen, bringing a rush of old memories. "Guess who's coming home for a while?" Laura said, sounding excited. Emma smiled automatically. "Don't tell me, Ethan." "Yep. He's been so burned out lately. Said he needed some quiet time. You might run into Heimhe. Always loved that little cafe downtown." Emma laughed softly, though something fluttered in her chest. "I'll keep an eye out for him," she said. After they hung up, she sat in silence, staring at the rain outside. Part of her felt nervous, which was ridiculous, she told herself. It wasn't like she had done anything wrong. Ethan was Laura's son, a grown man who had simply made a texting mistake. Still, she couldn't ignore the strange anticipation that crept into her thoughts. 3 days later, she saw him. Emma had stopped by the small cafe near the bookstore, the one with soft music and warm lighting. She was waiting for her order when a voice called her name. Emma. She turned, and there he was. Ethan stood by the counter, taller than she remembered, with that same easy smile. His hair was slightly messy from the wind, and his eyes those calm, steady eyes met hers with a warmth that made her forget how to breathe for a second. "Ethan," she said, surprised by how happy she sounded. "You're back." He nodded, slipping his hands into his jacket pockets. "Just for a while. Seattle was getting too loud, I guess." They ended up sitting together, catching up like old friends. The conversation flowed naturally, the way it always had. They talked about his job in the city, her new projects at work, and how fast time had flown since Laura's move. It was easy, comfortably familiar, yet different. There was a quiet awareness in the air. Something that hadn't been there before. Emma couldn't help noticing how much he'd changed. He had a quiet confidence now, the kind that came with age and experience. He still laughed easily, still had that kind nature, but there was something else, something deeper. When he looked at her, it felt like he saw her, not just as his mother's friend, but as someone who mattered in his story. When the cafe lights dimmed, signaling closing time, Ethan walked her to her car. The air outside was cool and smelled of rain. They stood for a moment under the streetlight, neither wanting to say goodbye just yet. "Emma," he said finally, his voice softer now. "About that message. The one I sent you by mistake." She smiled, trying to sound casual. "It's okay, really. Don't worry about it." Emma looked at him, torn between reason and the quiet truth her heart had already accepted. "You don't give up easily, do you?" He shook his head. "Not when it feels right." The moment stretched between them, fragile, real. As the sun disappeared behind the trees, Emma realized something she'd been too afraid to face. This wasn't about age or timing or right and wrong. It was about connection to people who found each other in the quiet spaces of life when neither expected to. She didn't know where it would go or if it would last, but she knew one thing for certain: her heart was awake again. And that, after years of silence, was something she couldn't ignore. Winter came quietly to the little town, soft and gray, wrapping the streets in fog and memory. Emma's days had fallen back into calm rhythm, but nothing felt the same. The world outside looked unchanged, yet inside, everything had shifted. Every time she passed the cafe where she and Ethan had talked, or saw the lake where he'd walked beside her, she felt something stir something. She'd tried to put away Ethan, had gone back to the city for a few weeks to finish a project. The house was silent again, and though she told herself it was good, she missed the sound of his laugh echoing through her kitchen. She missed the ease, the company, the way his presence filled the space without needing words. It wasn't supposed to happen, this attachment. But the heart rarely listens to reason once it starts to care. Then one evening, her phone buzzed with a short message. "I'm coming back this weekend. Can we talk?" She stared at the screen for a long moment. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Something inside her told her that whatever he wanted to say would change things again. When Saturday came, the town was blanketed in light snow. Emma made tea, trying to calm her nerves. She kept glancing out the window, though she told herself she wasn't waiting. At 4 p.m., she heard a knock. Ethan stood there, bundled in a dark coat, a quiet smile on his face. "Hi," he said softly. "Hi," she echoed, stepping aside to let him in. The warmth of the house seemed to ease the tension instantly. They sat by the fireplace, mugs in hand, the sound of logs crackling between them. "I thought I should give you space," he said after a pause. "But space didn't help. I just ended up missing you more." Emma looked into her cup, the steam rising between them like a gentle barrier. "Ethan, you know this isn't easy for me," she said quietly. "You mean a lot to me, but everything about this feels uncertain. You're younger, your mom," he stopped her gently. "I know all the reasons we shouldn't. I've thought about every single one of them. But I also know how I feel when I'm around you. I don't want to ignore that anymore." She looked up at him, seeing sincerity in his face. He wasn't impulsive or careless. He was steady, certain. And that steadiness pulled her in even more. "Sometimes," Sue said softly, "what feels right isn't what life expects from us." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then maybe life should adjust its expectations." She laughed quietly at that, a real laugh that she hadn't let herself have in weeks. You always find the words, she murmured. He smiled, leaning back slightly. That's because I mean them. They talked for hours about his city life, her quiet days, about Laura, and how things had changed since she left. It was warm, familiar. And yet the air between them carried a quiet electricity neither wanted to name out loud. When the fire burned low, Ethan stood and walked to the window. Do you ever think about how small choices change everything? He asked softly, like one wrong message. Emma smiled faintly. I think about that more than you know. He turned, his eyes meeting hers. That message, it wasn't the words that were wrong, just the way they arrived. I meant every bit of it, even if it wasn't supposed to reach you that day. Her breath caught, the world narrowing to that one simple truth. Ethan, she began, but he took a step closer. I'm not asking for promises, he said gently. I just want a chance to be honest about how I feel. To say it without mistakes this time. I slid wrong before, but I want to retry properly. The words hung in the air, fragile but full of hope. Emma felt something in her chest break open the quiet, careful wall she had built to protect herself from disappointment. She had spent so many years choosing safety over possibility. Yet here was someone standing before her asking for something real, something uncertain but alive. She looked at him, the flicker of the fire reflected in his eyes, and whispered, then retry. He smiled, slow and genuine, like he'd been holding that breath for months. They didn't rush into anything that night. They simply sat together, the quiet comfort between them saying more than words could. It wasn't the start of a perfect romance or some dramatic turning point. It was gentler than that. It was two hearts meeting halfway, deciding that maybe it was okay to care again. Over the next few weeks, their connection grew naturally. They went for drives through the misty hills, shared long talks by the fire, and learned how to exist in each other's worlds without forcing anything. Emma didn't try to define what it was. She didn't want labels. She wanted honesty. Ethan never pushed. He showed up, helped with chores, made her laugh, and listened to her stories. He didn't fill the silence, he made it peaceful. And that's what she loved most about him. Still, the thought of Laura lingered like a shadow. Emma knew there would come a day when everything would need to be explained. She didn't want secrets, but she also didn't want misunderstandings. Ethan understood that too. We'll tell her when it feels right, he said one night. Until then, let's just be real with each other, okay? And that's what they did. One Sunday afternoon, they met at the park where they used to feed ducks years ago. The lake was half frozen, the trees bare but beautiful. Ethan brought 2 coffees, just like he used to. Feels like everything started here, he said quietly. Emma smiled, wrapping her scarf tighter. No, it started long before that, she said. It started the day you helped me fix that old fence. I just didn't realize it back then. He laughed softly. I guess I've been working on second chances since I was a teenager. They sat on a bench watching the sky turn pink and gold. The world felt quiet, balanced, right? Ethan took a breath and said, you know, I used to think life was about finding people your age, doing what everyone else expected. But I think it's really about finding the person who makes time feel different. Emma looked at him, her eyes soft. Different? How? Smiled. Like it's not moving at all. For a moment she didn't say anything. She simply reached over and took his hand slowly, carefully, but without hesitation. His fingers tightened gently around hers. And the silence that followed was full of peace, not doubt. The sun slipped behind the hills, and they stayed until the park lights flickered on. Neither spoke about the future. They didn't need to. It was enough to know that they had found something true in a world full of noise and expectations. When they finally stood to leave, Ethan looked at her with quiet affection. So he said, a faint grin playing on his lips, I guess my first message wasn't a total mistake. Emma smiled, warmth filling her chest. No, she said softly. It just arrived too early. They walked together toward her car, footsteps slow, hearts steady. For once, neither of them felt like they were doing something wrong. They were just living, learning. choosing honesty over fear. And as the wind carried the last bit of winter chill across the empty park, Emma realized something simple but powerful. Life rarely unfolds the way we plan it. But sometimes the most unexpected paths lead us exactly where we're meant to be. The wrong message had found the right person after all. And this time she was ready to reply.